Hey there, your friend Susan here. And firstly, I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for being here. Today's episode is literally that you get to sit as though you are in the most comfortable chair beside two people talking about near-death experiences, consciousness, what happens when we're out of alignment and getting the smackdown, the spiritual smackdown that you're either prepared for or you're not. And I can promise you that you are going to leave this episode. And I encourage you to listen all the way to the end. It's a bit longer than I normally go because the wisdom that comes from my longtime friend and three-time guest is profound. And before we get into the show, one of the things that for me helps me stay in alignment is sleep. And when I'm not sleeping, I don't make the best decisions. Don't get the workouts I want. I'm not the CEO I want to be, the mother I want to be, the human I want to be. I don't show up in the way that I need to for all of you and for the world. So sleep is key. And I have tried many things to get a better sleep. And one thing that is working for me tremendously is a product called Harmonia from Isogenics. And if you go to susansly.com, Trusted Partners tab, scroll all the way down the bottom and click that link. Harmonia is a natural sleep menopause formula. Actually, it's for women 30 plus who really struggle, and I'm having much deeper sleep, and it is transformative. They also have a sleep spray that is for men and women, and it's all natural, just a couple sprays in the mouth about at 30 minutes before bed. And it's incredible. And another formula they have is something called Ionics. And Ionics has adaptogens and which help to really calm your body and calm your mind and prepare you for sleep. So I love those three products. And again, they have transformed how I sleep and the quality of my sleep. And I encourage you to check them out. If you are a woman who is navigating perimenopause or menopause and you are looking for support, you are looking to get questions answered, stop looking on TikTok and Instagram because there are a lot of great resources, but there are a lot of resources that are not evidence-based. And so my new company, the Pause Technologies, we have created a mobile app that has a 24/7 AI coach named Harmony, trademark. She named herself. And it also has incredible meditations and fun challenges to help keep you centered and really improve your wellness. And one of the things women say is, whether it's 2 in the morning or it's 2 in the afternoon, I have the support I've been looking for. And so go ahead to www.thepause.ai and check it out. It's available on Android, it's available on iOS, and we have created a very special offer for early subscribers for only $29 for the year, and which is incredible, $29.99. So go check it out on www.thepause.ai. My guest today is a Navy SEAL, and he was a Navy SEAL team leader. He is a New York Times best-selling author. He is a CEO, and he is an incredible human being. And he created SEAL Fit, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. He has been a transformational leader for people all over the world. He and I were talking about that, millions of people. And he is also someone who is so willing to be vulnerable and to take a look and say, hey, you know what? This is happening for me, not to me. And even though it's unbelievable, I am going to grow and go higher from it. And so my guest today is the one and only Mark Divine. This is Raw and Real Entrepreneurship, the show that brings the no-nonsense truth of what is required to start, grow, and scale your business. I am your host, Susan Sly. Well, what is up, raw and real entrepreneurs, wherever you are in the world? I hope you're having an amazing day. And the thing I have to say is, damn it, I didn't hit record because I was catching up with an old friend and we had so much to talk about. And then about half an hour into our conversation, I'm like, oh, we better do a show. And if you've been a longtime listener, you have heard Mark on the show before, but a lot has changed in Mark's life since last time he was here. And he's the only guest that I've had on 3 times. No one else has made that record. And so, Mark, welcome back to the show, my friend.
It's so great to see you again, Susan. And by the way, I have done that several times where I've made it through an entire podcast and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to record this. It's one of the more embarrassing things when you have to look at the guests and be like, well, thank you for your time. Great conversation, but we're going to have to do it all over again.
Yeah, and
Drop.
and
Sorry.
plus because we know each other, we're having this great conversation and it's like, okay, let's share this with the world. Mark, you narrowly died 2.5 months ago.
Yeah,
And
that's the closest I've ever come.
considering Navy SEAL and everything else that you've done, deployments, let's jump in and talk about that because that has been a catalyst for changing your whole business, your everything that's going on. So let's journey to my home country. I take no responsibility of this, but the way we know it snows in Canada, but can you share with everyone
Sure.
what happens?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, right. I made it through 20 years as a SEAL and didn't even break a bone. It's not that I didn't stare death in the face several times. I had a parachute accident, mid-air collision, almost died in that, but I didn't get injured. I almost got drowned in locking out of a submarine, that where the escape hatch got stuck, but I didn't get injured. It was really interesting. It was just really close calls. I almost, got shot several times where the bullet just kind of glanced by my ear or something like that. Um, and all of those didn't stop me in my tracks. I was just like, oh, that's part of the job. There's danger. I was fortunate enough to walk away. But here I am 2.5 months ago, you know, not expecting really any danger. I hadn't been invited to snowmobile. And I didn't really understand the nature of what's happened to snowmobiling, lately. Right. I had this in my mind, my dad's 1974 Skidoo, which went about 30 miles an hour and was always breaking down. And I also had in my mind this kind of nostalgic idea of like, like hut skiing on snowmobiles where you kind of like tour through nature and go to a cool place and have a beer and, a nice
Yeah.
meal. That sounded fun. So when this guy asked me for the fourth time, fourth year in a row to come, and I had said no, 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 but this time I just kind of said yes. My schedule had freed up. I just finished my PhD. And so there I found myself up in Canada, and I'll tell the short version of the story, and I'm ripping along at 80, and then 80 miles an hour, like I'm barely hanging on. I'm thinking to myself, shit, I don't want to do this for 4 days. Like I don't have a need for speed. I was a SEAL for 20 years. I've gotten all of that out of my system. So I was already kind of a little bit regretting being there. And then we go into this wooded area and we're like ripping around corners. Like I can't keep up with this guy. And I'm getting a little nervous that I don't want to get lost. And so obviously I was distracted. That's a big lesson right there. Like if you're going to be doing something like that, this extreme danger. And in the SEALs, I learned that like don't stay radically focused.
Mm.
And I was getting distracted because I wasn't in control of my environment. Like I hadn't trained for this. I didn't know this area. I hadn't scouted it. Right? I didn't know this guy very well. I didn't know the routes. I was in a foreign country, and all these things started to distract me. Like, oh shit! And sure enough, I rounded a corner, and there's another snowmobile coming at me. Pretty much, almost like 80% in my lane. He had taken the turn wide, and so we were looking at a head-on collision, and he wasn't moving. Like he was a deer in the headlights, like probably going like, oh shit. So me being the Navy SEAL, I had to act. So I veered to the right, trying to pass him, but there wasn't enough room. My sled caught a ditch, and next thing you know, I'm flying through the air 40 miles an hour, and I hit a tree. Now, I told you earlier, I was heading toward that tree head first, and had I hit my head, I certainly wouldn't be here right now. I'd probably either at a minimum be brain damaged or most likely had been killed. But all the years of training, martial arts training starting when I was 21, all the SEAL training, all the way up until that very day, led me to immediately, like instantaneously, reposition my body. It wasn't even conscious; it just happened, like I did in Aikido tuck and roll.
Mm.
And so I ended up hitting the tree with my upper back and shoulder. And there I am, just laying in the snow, and I'm looking up and thinking, "Holy crap, that was crazy." And but I'm alive, and I know I'm alive because I don't think heaven looks like Canada. Pretty sure.
Well, some Canadians might argue,
They
but
might argue with that, but I don't think it looks exactly like Canada. Let's put it that way. Um, and I knew I wasn't concussed, and I could move my hands and fingers, and I wasn't paralyzed. And so I was just like a wave of gratitude. So that would be my first two lessons. Was one is when you're doing high speed shit, you got to pay really close attention. You can't get distracted, right? Put you at extreme risk. And number two is, and if something does happen, immediately look forward and be grateful for the things you have, right? So I
mm,
was grateful that I had my conscious, my life, that I wasn't brain damaged, and that I wasn't paralyzed. And I knew that everything else was just roses. You know what I mean? Everything else, it was fine. I'd be fine. That was pretty cool to have that awareness. And I tried to get up and I couldn't even move, right? And that's when I realized, well, I really did injure myself.
who came back for you? Because that other guy was way ahead.
Yeah, he came back finally.
How long did you lay there for?
About 10 minutes.
Mm.
Yeah. And I knew he would come back. I knew he wouldn't go, like he would stop at the next intersection and wait. And then when I didn't show up, he was like, uh-oh. So
And
anyways,
so
he helped me
thinking,
up. He helped me up. And like I literally, this is Mark Navy SEAL. I tried to get back on my snowmobile to drive it, and I couldn't lift my arm up. My right arm was completely useless. And
mm,
that was when I knew, I was naively thinking, well, maybe I dislocated my shoulder. That would have been nice. No. So I had to ride in the back of his snowmobile out for 45 minutes in this terrible pain. And then we finally found someone who could, they all speak French up there, as you know. They pride themselves on not speaking English.
mhm.
I don't speak French, and so neither did my friend. And so we like trying to get people to call 911, get in it. We finally got someone to dial 911. I understand we were in trouble. Ambulance took us to the hospital. It took 9 hours for me to get seen. And so I'm pacing back and forth, and I from the outside, I looked fine, right? You would never know that I just smacked into a tree at 40 miles an hour. I'm box breathing. I'm deploying every single skill that I teach Navy SEAL trainees. I'm box breathing, saying my positive affirmations, right? I'm visualizing healing already, and I'm doing the pain management. Like I'm bypassing the pain. Like Navy SEALs are taught to not just manage pain, but to ignore it until it's necessary to pay attention to it again. But there were a few times where I asked, hey, can I get some pain meds? I think I really hurt myself. They're like, no, we can't give you anything until doctor sees you. And I'm like, okay. They finally gave me 2 Tylenol. Anyway, so I go and finally get the X-ray and MRI. And I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be another 9 hours. I'm like settling in for a long night, long, painful night. And 15 minutes later, the doctor comes running out like, Mark, yo, shit, get in here. He goes, I didn't know you were this badly hurt and damaged, or you broke your scapula in 18 pieces. You got 8 broken ribs. You got punctured lungs. We need to get you in a hospital bed. And I smiled. And I said, now can I have some pain meds? And he looked at a nurse and said, get him some morphine. I'm like, oh, thank you, baby Jesus.
I love the Talladega Nights reference. I,
Exactly.
the first time I heard about box breathing was from you. And for everyone listening, it doesn't have to be a high-speed snowmobile chase. You're building a business and you have to focus, but you're trying to focus, you're distracted, and then something happens. You get a letter from someone's attorney, or an employee exposes IP, or just some crap happens. You mentioned box breathing, you
Mhm.
mentioned affirmations. Can you share with everyone, give a lesson on box breathing
Sure.
to start? And then I want to know, what affirmations does Mark Divine say to himself in a situation like that?
Yeah, so it's part of like these four skills that if you practice, if you build them into a daily practice, they're transformative. They allow you to access flow on demand and remain
Mm,
really alert and calm. And the first one is box breathing. And there's variations of box breathing. So it's not one strict practice. It really is kind of a maybe kind of a grab bag of practices that you deploy as needed. But the core practice is it's all nostril diaphragmatic breathing. And the first real, focus is arousal control. Like you just addressed, like if you got something stressful that happens, a trigger, or you got something stressful coming up like a speech, or you need to calm yourself down, then you're really looking to control the arousal response, which means to activate your parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system. Well, so that's like an acute use. You use this in acute situation, great, but you got to practice it. And the benefit of practicing it every day is A, you've got the skill when you need it, but B, it it rewires your nervous system to bleed off all that extra stress that you pick up. And a lot of us are stuck in a state of hyperarousal, which means they're literally atrophied your parasympathetic pathway. And so a daily practice of box breathing, I recommend, twice a day, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, has profound impact on your nervous system and on a lot of other things too. But that's the start. You got to get the nervous system back into balance. So you inhale deeply through your nostrils to a count of five, and when you do that, your belly relaxes. Right? A lot of people have the opposite, where when they inhale, they tuck their belly in. It's the exact opposite. You relax your belly and you allow the fullness of the breath to be experienced, drawing a lot more air in because you're breathing through your nose than you went through your mouth. The average person breathes a lot through their mouth, about 17 times a minute. With box breathing, we're breathing 3 times a minute, right? 5 seconds inhale, then you hold your breath for 5 seconds, then 5 seconds exhale again through the nose, and then hold your breath for 5 seconds. Some people struggle with the exhale hold, and so you can truncate it. Like it doesn't have to be five on the exhale. So what this does is it massages your vagus nerve. It gets you a lot of oxygen. It retrains your muscles to draw in a lot of oxygen, a lot of chi, life force. It actually stimulates your brain, right? Because you're breathing through the nostrils instead of your mouth. And it really calms yourself down. It calms your body down. If your body's calming, your brain is calming down, and that's experienced subjectively as clarity and a little bit of less of that monkey mind. So it's profound. We teach this to SEALs, and that is the practice. But then when they go into combat, right, we say, okay, just you're going to do something we call tactical breathing, where you just don't hold for 5 seconds. You just inhale and then slowly exhale, and just a slight pause at the inhale and the exhale. And that's a 5 count in and then a 5 count out, roughly, which is 6 breaths per minute,
mm,
which research has just kind of confirmed as the ideal breathing pattern. 6 breaths per minute through your nose, deep diaphragmatic breathing. It's the ideal pattern for optimal health and longevity. And you can heal your body. You can actually get into your optimal weight. Some magic happens when you begin to do this, and it becomes your normal breathing pattern.
mm.
Over time, that won't be something you have to think about. You literally train yourself so that during the day, every day, you're breathing naturally through your nose, deep diaphragmatically, 5 count in, 5 count out. And it literally changes your life. That's that first skill. And then, the other skills really kind of tie together. There's the second one is what you referred to as like how do you talk to yourself, right?
Mhm.
It's that, automatic negative thoughts. Like most people have negative conditioning, negative programming. Our culture, media, TV, news cycle, it's all negative. And so that just gets kind of greased into you. And especially if you grow up with trauma or negative families or Um, it can be debilitating because it's largely hidden from view, right? I call that your background of obviousness. It's not obvious to you, but it can be to everyone else around you, right? Because it's how your operating system works. So you've got to override that, right? Because whatever you give energy to will grow, as you know. So by entertaining negative thinking, like, oh shit, well, so there I am. Had I laying on the floor of that forest, looking up through the trees, had I been beating myself up and playing the victim and being pissed off at the snow, the guy who drove me off the trail and wanting to, chase him down and discover who he was, and I could have gone down an entire rabbit hole trying to figure out how to sue this guy, and it's all negative, and it would have been depleting my body of energy. So you've got to do the exact opposite, right? You've got to intercept those negative thoughts, and you've got to replace them with positive affirmations, and you got to stake your claim there until you make it, until you start to really start
Mm.
to feel positive. The shortcut is through radical acceptance and forgiveness, but most people need to like cultivate a positive mindset before they can even get there. It's kind of like Dr. Hawkins said, you got to go through courage to get to acceptance,
Yeah.
and through acceptance to get to forgiveness. So for me, I've got some go-tos. One of my favorite was coined by Emile Coué, the French guy. Day by day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. And I say better and stronger.
Mm.
Ooh, yeah, hey. So I like them to rhyme. Day by day, in every way, I'm getting better and stronger. Hoo ya hey. Hoo ya hey. Hoo ya is a Navy SEAL
Mhm.
mantra for we got this. Right? Easy day. And then I always fall back on my Navy SEAL buds mantra, which is I'm feeling good, I'm looking good, I ought to be in Hollywood. I don't actually want to be in Hollywood, and I know that, but it's got a nice ring to it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I've got another one, which is just, and then this one I said over and over and over again, throughout this accident, every day. You've got this, Mark. Easy day, piece of cake. Hoo-yah, right?
Mm.
So simple. So simple. So whenever I'm in a hard workout or I'm experiencing pain in my shoulder because I've got this erector set in there trying to hold all these bones together, I talk to myself from the second person perspective.
Mm.
This is powerful. There's research on this too, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm acting like my higher self, talking to my ego. It's my ego that is experiencing the resistance, the pain, the not wanting to do it, the wanting to quit, right? The traumas. That's all ego conditioning. And so I seat myself in the witness and I talk to myself, say, you got this, Mark. Almost like a little brother,
Mm.
you got this. Come on, easy day. And
Mm.
sometimes I even go like, we've got this. And then I start to feel like I've got a split personality, but it's, we've got this. How many of there are you? Uh, It's all
Well, if
one.
you include your, the parts of you that sometimes do rebel, right? You
Yeah,
can't
the
see
shadow parts.
it.
Yeah, they're all legitimate parts of the ego personality for sure.
Exactly. And I love that you shared that because I was thinking as you were talking about the talking, to yourself, the Claude Bristol, The Magic of Believing, that book from the 30s. And
Right.
he talks about that and the mirror activity. And I started doing it
Great activity.
and it was amazing because everything that I would say in the mirror every morning, eventually those things started happening.
Right.
And Mark, it almost freaks me out to be very candid because sometimes we make things really hard. And as Joe Dispenza says, everything you're experiencing right now is a manifestation of the thoughts that you have on
That's
repeat,
right.
right?
It's
And
a
thinking about,
radically reflective world, right? You
yeah.
you receive back what you put out. But
So
what you
why
put
did
out
the
is largely
accident,
hidden from view, right?
yeah.
That's the problem.
So why did the accident happen to you then? Being the high conscious person you are, why do you think it happened?
Well, this is such an interesting thing, and I love to have a conversation about this, not just tell my part because I don't really. I could easily veer into telling you more than I know and pretending
Mhm.
that I know it. Right? I don't.
Yeah.
Um, Being human is extraordinarily complex, right? You have the consciousness that you bring into this world, and I think our overarching purpose is to remove negative karmic tendencies to allow that to elevate, to ascend to higher levels. Um, and at the same time, we get born into these families that I believe are also chosen. We spiritually choose it.
Mhm.
And so when I look at my life, so I got karmic tendencies, you got the general consciousness level, which you could probably map if you're trained with muscle testing. Say, okay, Mark came in as blankety blank. And maybe he's either evolved or descended, depending upon his choices.
Mhm.
Probably a toss up for me. And then you have the conditioning, right? But it's easy to gloss over the conditioning. The impact it has on your life it's incredible. It's persistent. It never goes away. Um, and it can take lifetimes to unwind, a particularly traumatic childhood. And at the same time, um, I believe the more challenging the childhood, then the more spiritually evolved you are, because that's, you're choosing deliberately to experience the hardship so that you can face those challenges in this life, right? So
Mhm.
anybody who is listening is thinking, well, I don't know why the hell. I must be a low consciousness human to have chosen to be sexually assaulted or be abused. I say, actually, it's probably the opposite, right? Because those are the most challenging human conditions and the ripest opportunity for accelerating your development. So I
Mhm.
got born into a really challenging family situation. God bless them. They're great people, and I adapted. Like I was magnificently adaptive to
Mhm.
the point where I thought I had the perfect family, but they were extremely abusive. A lot of boundary issues,
Mhm. It
sexual
is.
boundary issues breached, and oh, you know what I mean, a lot of rage. And I think I was really angry, but since my dad was a rager, I had to suppress that. It wasn't safe to be angry,
Yeah.
and I ended up being really codependent, which is a natural outcropping or kind of outcome of growing up in a shame-based environment.
Mhm.
And so part of that codependence was hanging on to things. Like I have claw marks hanging on to my business, the old form of my business, as you and I talked about, like not wanting to let it go, not wanting to let people go. Um, the other outcome of growing up in those environments is, you really, you lack so much confidence or trust in yourself that you look to others to solve your problem. And so you become a magnet for narcissists. And so I was a magnet for narcissists who would come in and tell me they're going to solve all my problems with my business and then steal the entire thing.
Mhm.
So I ended up um, hanging on for so long to this business that I started back in 2006, actually started in 2001, but has been transformed several times. And yet I knew it wasn't serving me, especially since COVID and some other things that happened and some of the narcissists who really destroyed it. And our revenue was down like 70%. And I'm like just pouring money into it, paying everybody else and not myself, which is, the entrepreneur's dilemma. Like that's why they say pay yourself first.
Yeah.
And anyways, and just hanging on and not being willing to let it go. And then there were other things that I was hanging on to, right? Not just the business, but in relationships, I was making decisions that were not really nurturing for my family, my wife and family. And I was basically had all these latent tendencies come up. And we talked about this, and I truly believe this that the more evolved you get, because I've done some intense spiritual evolutionary work in my life, and in many ways I'm evolved like, significantly. But like Ken Wilber says, now you wake up, grow up, show up, and then he's like, "Oops, I missed one. You got to clean up too. You got to clean up the past, the shadow, or else it'll keep on showing up, and it'll show up in bigger and bigger and nastier ways." You know what I mean? And even all the saints and sages and even Jesus talked about this, right? The farther along you get, the bigger the um, karmic and other tendencies, that the more they're going to really kind of attack you. Those seven deadly sins, right? They show up in a big way. to
Mhm.
try to take you off track. It's a final test, maybe. So that was all happening, right? And I was ignoring it, and then I was like wanting to run away. You know, big part of me, the ego was like, man, maybe I've done enough, right, Susan? I had this mission to help 100 million people find a path to integration and wholeness, to bring more love and light and compassion in the world, world-centric leaders. And I've had people tell, Mark, you have no idea the impact you've made through your books and your teachings and whatnot. You've probably hit 100 million. And I think my ego grabbed onto that and be like, well, shit, maybe I'm done.
Mhm.
I'm ready. And the reality was, underneath that was, I don't know if I'm worthy.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm worthy. And I don't know if I can, I don't know how to do the next level of work to feel worthy, to step into that fullness of who I need to be to fulfill that earthly mission. I couldn't see it clearly. The vision was getting murky because I was getting stuck in the mud of business challenges and money and all that, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was in a rut, so to speak. And as I was in this rut, and this rut has been going on for several years, now I find myself zooming along this trail. And guess what? I hit a rut.
Yeah.
And the other thing was kind of interesting is I told Sandy before my wife, before I left, I said, I really think I need a break. Like I need to go on sabbatical. I need to slow down, clear the air, like get some distance. Like my life had gotten so the opposite of what I teach about simplicity and decluttering and it's a no unless it's a hell yes.
Mhm.
All these things. Um, I feel like I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. You talked about your schedule causing anxiety. I'm doing podcasts every week and I put out a book. I just finished my PhD. I'm trying to
Yeah.
run 3 businesses and I'm trying to do it all in 4 hours a day because that's all I allow myself because I prioritize my health so much,
Yeah.
And so a lot of things were falling through the cracks or I was like, I don't know. Anyways, that was part of it too. And I was like, I think I need a break, Sandy. And so I got a break. I got like 25 of them. That's not the way I wanted to have the break. But so that's a long-winded answer to your very simple question. I think this happened because actually it was probably a very graceful way for universe, higher power, guides and gardens, whoever, to to smack me down and wake me up and slow me down and get me to step up and stop screwing around, right? In shame and worry and not trusting myself. Um, Otherwise, I would have died, you know, and gone on to a different mission. But the fact that I didn't, and I'm like literally, I walked down the street, nobody would know the internal damage. Nobody would know, and I will have a full recovery. It just it'll take about 9 months total. So I feel like I got off easy, right? It was like a slap in the face, but it was a body slap. And one of the biggest things that kept coming to me afterward in the week afterwards is like, pay attention, Mark. And I didn't mean like pay attention while on a snowmobile. I meant pay attention to this. Don't waste this opportunity. Anytime we have a smackdown, like it, especially the big ones, like it is a rich, rich opportunity, right? For evolution, for insight, for clarity, and to move on. Like we said, it's like the transformation, the chicken coming out of the egg is painful. It's hard. It's confusing. 1 minute they're in this dark little egg, totally comfortable. The next minute they're being compelled to like peck at it, like this home that they've had to break out into what? They have no idea what's on the other side. So that's what it's like. It's painful. But on the other side, poof, right? Suddenly a whole new vista opens up.
And the thing is with you, and we were talking about this before the show, and myself included, we cannot do once the consciousness is expanded, it cannot go back to its previous form.
Right.
And for people who just to share that Dr. David Hawkins, who Mark mentioned, he wrote the book Power versus Force, and he was the sort of the forefather of muscle testing. And I was in my work I used to do and speaking and so forth, that I was trained by Dr. Hawkins himself in muscle testing. And David, when he was in his wheelchair, and he talked about how his body, like his consciousness, outgrew his body. And
Right.
then when Wayne Dyer, I was in Maui, and I told you this story, Mark, but Ram Dass was there, and the same thing happened to him. And I looked in Ram Dass's eyes because I wanted to see what love looked like.
Yeah.
And I've never, Mark, experienced anything so profound. It was, I just stared and stared. And Wayne was like, "Do you want to meet Ram Dass?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "I just want to stare in his eyes and I want to experience love." I never experienced anything like that, but he couldn't speak
Yeah.
and his body had given out. And when we're on this mission and we're focused on a mission that's so much bigger than us, that we also, you mentioned about affirmations and how we speak to ourselves. You said to Sandy, "I need a break." And my youngest Avery, when she was 5, she said, "Mummy, sometimes God doesn't tap you on the shoulder; He hits you over the head with a frying pan because it becomes so literal, and we have to be cautious
Right.
about our words, right?" And so you and I were talking, and I was saying, like, I'm looking at my schedule now; it's giving me anxiety. Well, that's wonderful. That's a tap on the shoulder. Smacking into a tree is a frying pan moment. And I know if I don't deal with the tap on the shoulder, I will have my frying pan moment too. And that's what happens. And so you came back from this and said, "I'm gonna deconstruct like this breaking my bones is a metaphor for what I'm gonna do with my companies." And
That's
you've done
right.
a lot in the last 2.5 months. I mean, it's crazy.
Right. I had to basically break the bones of my business and completely reorganize them and bring my own little erector set in and create reconstructive, do some reconstructive surgery. And that's hard to do, especially for organizations that have been around for a while. SealFit I started in 2005. So that's been around, quite a bit, 20 years almost. And you accrete a lot of baggage, systems, processes, people, and it wasn't working anymore. So I basically upended that organization. I had to let people go, ending all of our public events, which have been really popular, but they don't make any money. Event businesses are, yeah, it's a lost leader. But we had these very popular things called the Crucible or Kokoro. So we're running our last Kokoro this July. That's a Navy SEAL simulation for Hell Week, but it's a transformation process. Um, and I'm bringing in partners to run aspects of that business, and I'm in removing myself, at least my physical self, from any operational role there, taking my team off the task too, right? Stuff like that. And then I've relaunched and rebranded as Mark Divine Leadership so that I can step into the fullness. You'll appreciate this. I really wanted to call it Divine Leadership, but the practical side of me kept hearing the advice that, what, people will think it's like a Christian organization, and it's not. It's right. It's my name, but it's certainly going to be teaching spiritual principles. So maybe someday I'll drop the mark off and we'll have some leadership. Got to establish the brand first. So, anyways, the bigger principle you're getting at is, we have to do this with our personality, right? You have to deconstruct stories and then, determine what's the bigger story, what's your true potential, and what does it look like? How are you going to define that? What value systems, what passions, what's your purpose? And then you create a new story around that. But then you have to train that new story, and you train it with your dialogue, you train it with your thoughts, you train it with your imagery, you practice that imagery until you create a memory of that future self, right? Because our ego mind, the linear mind, is all based on memory, right? So you have all this memory cascading into the present, which is essentially deciding your future. And that's why most people's future look exactly like their past. If you want to change, you have to create a memory of a future that is radically different
Mm.
so that you're pulling from that instead of the other stuff, the negative stuff or the stuff that's limiting you.
And what do you say to someone who says, I'm going through so much trauma, or I've had so much trauma, I have a hard time imagining a future. Like I can think of some people right now that would say, I can't imagine a future that's different than the
Sure.
one I'm anticipating that's so painful.
Yeah, I think that's fairly common. So first off, join the club, right?
Yeah.
Right. There's not a single human being that isn't traumatized at some level. Family, culture, right? Friends, peers, abusers.
Mhm.
Um, and so in order construct, to be able to construct a positive view of the future, you've got to address the traumas. You don't have to address them all. You don't have to heal from all. But you have to take a look at them and to recognize that they're there. So that's kind of the first step in self-awareness is to recognize that these things are things that happen to you, but they're not who you are, that you have agency, right? So they say with trauma work, it's just bringing it into awareness, right? It's 9/10 of the work because then you stop identifying with it. Say, oh, look at that. There's a trauma pattern. That's not Mark, right?
Mhm.
That's just a broken off piece of my personality that was, you know, a survival mechanism that made a lot of sense at the time, when you were 3 years old. But, it's not serving me so well at 55 or 60 now. So we're going to take a look at that and whatnot. And so I think, like for me, this all started the self awareness work. I told this story, I think, probably on our first podcast when I started studying Zen with Mr. Nakamura in New York City. And the process, we talked about box breathing earlier. So he didn't teach box breathing, but I naturally was led into that practice. It's something that I think the body intuitively knows, right? You have this wisdom inside of you. And so I started box breathing, and then I started, as the entryway to my meditative practice. And then his practice of Zen was like concentration boot camp, right? It was the attention control and concentration. Hold your attention on inhale, exhale, and count one. Inhale, exhale, count two. But the trick was, the gamification was when, not if, but when your mind wanders and you notice it, you got to go back to zero, right? You don't
Mm.
get to just keep on going. So you go back to zero. And obviously, in the beginning of that practice, you're not very honest with yourself because you get up like 6, 7, 8. You're like, I'm doing great, but the whole time you're thinking about other stuff, but you're just not even aware of it because it's the default mode network. It's there. So the longer you sit, the more you notice that your attention is split. I am sitting here and inhaling, exhaling, counting to 10, but my mind is also working on all these other loops and patterns, and it's all just happening automatically. And so I actually never got beyond one. And that right there is a huge like aha moment, like, oh, holy shit. Okay, let's take this seriously. Like when he means no other thought, he means no other thought, just that. And that's the beginning of concentration training.
Mm.
And so I stayed with that for months and months and months until I could get to like six. And he even said, I was thinking like I was a perfectionist, like probably you and a lot of other people, right? Because that's a response from my childhood. And if I didn't get to 10, I was a loser. Like I was a failure. And I asked him one day at our little Dharma talks, which happened. He said, no. If you can hold your attention for about 50% of the time, you're doing pretty good. That's like expert level. So what's cool, Susan, is that their physical body was already strong. Now I'm like refining my mind by narrowing my attention, holding my attention on this just a simple breathing pattern. And I've got the arousal control from this breathing pattern, which was box breathing, because I would inhale, hold, and then exhale, hold, count one. So arousal control, I was getting really calm. In the midst of New York City, I started to feel really calm, right? And then I'm able to hold my concentration for a long period of time. Now, this next part is magic, right? This is where everyone needs to hear. And I'll tie it back into deconstructing, right? Because up until that time, I was completely merged with my thoughts. I was completely merged with the story and I was getting my MBA at Stern University, Stern School of Business. I was becoming a certified public accountant, working for Coopers and Lybrand, and I was going to go make a ton of money, and then maybe go back to the family business and transform that and make a ton of money. That was the story. Well, by learning how to meditate and just trusting this process and going through this process, which was a continuum, arousal control, attention control, concentration, suddenly I would open up, something happened. And I don't remember, it wasn't like an exact moment, but it happened over a period of a few weeks where suddenly I completely, um, I don't want to sound, this word is not the right word, but I disassociated from my thoughts.
Mhm.
It wasn't like a dissociative break or a psychotic break. It was where I literally popped into witnessing awareness. And it wasn't permanent. I had to do it in meditation at first, where all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, I am not my thoughts. I see them now. And so then I could ask questions about them. And that's when I started journaling because I'm like, are those thoughts really serving me? And the story that I was telling myself, I saw it wasn't serving me. It wasn't my story. I wasn't interested in what I was doing really. I wasn't passionate about it. I didn't care about the money. I didn't like the work even. I mean, there's so much about it that was just wrong. But it took me to like pop out of that story to be able to observe it from afar to recognize that I was living that lie, that false ego lie that was conditioned by my family and by my, upbringing and society and whatnot. So that gave me the opportunity then to begin to deconstruct that story and then to ask, while I'm deconstructing that story, to ask the dangerous question, who am I really? Why am I on this planet? What am I going to do about it? And I would ask those questions before I would meditate. And then I would go in and my practice had now deepened to the place where I would even fall off into, to nonlinear, timeless reality. And, you bring gifts back when that happens. And every time that would come back, I would have a deeper understanding of who I really was. And I kept feeling and sensing that I was meant to be a warrior, that I was a warrior. And I had been a warrior in past lifetimes. And here I was, training to be a CPA. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's how I'm supposed to be a warrior. Right. And so I was able to begin to ask better questions and to begin to envision a different future. But I had to first see that the story I was living was false. And I hadn't even at this point gotten into the trauma. Right. This is really just the story that led me there, which was an outcome of the trauma, trying to be the perfect, dutiful son, right? Put points on the board, be the perfect athlete, be the star pupil, be the son who goes out and makes millions of dollars and makes mommy proud,
Yeah.
I didn't even get into the underlying traumas. That didn't happen until I married my therapist wife, and I'm still working on that today. It's a lifetime practice. So you can, if you have like serious trauma and you're thinking, oh, I can't envision a positive future, that's okay. First, know that you are not your trauma. It's just something that happened, and that inside that is a opportunity. So it's an opportunity you can either play the victim, and suffer for the rest of your life, or you can see that as a seed for radical growth and transformation. And trying to understand, or it's better to just go straight to forgiveness.
Yeah.
Have the courage to go straight to forgiveness. That's the fast track through that. Every trauma, straight to forgiveness. Let it go. Release that energy. That's the opportunity. And as you release the energy, the story you were telling about yourself, not worthy, right? Can't do this, can't do that, not beautiful. You stop believing it. It loses its convincingness, right? It loses its grip over you because you're like, oh, that's bullshit story. Because you are not your thoughts. If you're not your thoughts, then you can't possibly be what they say you are. That's a lie. So you begin to really kind of seat your awareness more in your spiritual center until eventually it's permanent. Sitting in silence really helps. I don't have to call it meditation. I love Punjab's quote, like sitting in silence is the most important thing for you to do. Don't waste time not doing it.
Yes. And to that point, I always think, what would my perfect day, or if I'm being interviewed, what is my perfect day? My perfect day is literally sitting in silence and meditating for the whole day.
Same. Big
That
time.
that's and to I love what you said about asking the questions, because so many people will go into what they think is a meditation, and a meditation is very open to interpretation, but they're going in and there's a lot of talking and so forth happening where it's so forced, like I've got to think about this. And you and I are both trained in neurolinguistic programming as well, and really that comes down to pattern interrupts and asking the question. So I'll give an example. So going into a meditation, and let's say your focus is generating wealth, and you say, I am wealth. Then the next question before you go in the meditation is, why is it I am wealth? And then, as you said, coming back with the gifts, and your mind is going to go, huh? Because most people say, I'm not wealth, I can't make money. So your mind goes searching and seeking for evidence to support what is real versus saying, oh, why is it I am wealth? Oh, I had a lemonade stand when I was 6 and I made $30. Oh, okay. I just got a raise. Okay, your mind is like a puppy. It's gonna go retrieve whatever it is you
That's
send
right.
it out to retrieve. So my question is, as we're coming to a close here, are you asking different questions now before you go into your meditation?
When I go into my meditations now, I'm entering it from not Mark.
Mm.
So it's really become much more of a resting in the wholeness, and anything that is puzzling, the Mark character, right? I'll just ask for clarity and guidance.
Mm.
Um, Again, it's part of the surrender practice. Like I'm surrendering any ego attachment to my business. I'm surrendering the resistance that I had prior to the accident and saying, show me, like how, like I don't want to presuppose I know how I'm supposed to fulfill my mission. Like even Navy SEALs, we don't we pretend to know how, but there's no mission that ever goes exactly like we planned. And so we're very adaptable, very open to like things changing on the fly, which is one of the unique hallmarks of what we do because we're so adaptable. Um, so I'm practicing that. Questions. Um, I would say again, no. I'm not in my meditations, right? Not in my meditations. My meditation has gotten into a place where I very quickly just drop in and experience the stillness. I would say where my big shift for me is because I was so closed off as a youth, right? And even well into my adult life, walled off because it wasn't safe to feel and it wasn't safe to express emotions. So for me, remember the term kokoro, I think I mentioned to you once before. It means to merge your heart and your mind and then bring them forth into your actions.
Mm.
And so for me, I'm really trying to, like I've had this incredible experience, like a yana yoga, right? The path of wisdom, where when I meditate, I am the expanse, right? I am the
Mm.
totality. But I've been experiencing it from here up.
Mm.
And so I'm like now dropping that, right? And like experiencing that from the heart out, merging heart and mind as one. In the Eastern traditions, the three primary paths, up the mountain of enlightenment are Jnana Yogi. That was like Ramana Maharshi's "Who am I?" path, asking that's the dangerous question, and recognizing that you are actually the totality. You are source. And the other one was bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, the path of heart, like Mother Teresa. No, actually, she's probably more karma yoga. She kind of blends the two. And the third one was like karma yoga, service. That was the whole story of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Like he couldn't avoid his karma. He had to be in service as a warrior, even though he knew that it was going to. He subscribed to ahimsa, nonviolence, but his karma was to be a warrior. So he was struggling, like, how do I? And so because he was a karma warrior, he had to go fulfill his karma duty. So those three. And Kokoro means to bring them all together into one. And that's what I'm working on right now.
Mm.
Throw in a dose of forgiveness as well.
It's interesting you mentioned the Gita. I was just a friend is going through some interesting things with his company, and I messaged him a passage from the Gita, and he messaged me one back, and it was very much about this conversation, this dialogue about being a warrior, but a warrior in service. And when you decide that that is your path, there is no other path, because when you stray from the path, then things happen and to put you back on the path. And Mark, I I am so excited for you as your friend to go through this evolution of your businesses and for you to be here. I'm grateful you're here because I know there's a bigger path and purpose for you, and that it took a snowmobile accident to go, okay, I've got to
Yeah,
take these
I
things.
should come
I'm
up with a better story, right? So
Yeah.
stupid snowmobile.
Yeah, it could have been like I was sitting at the beach and looking at the ocean and whales were,
Yeah, it looks like
dancing.
the scar on my back, everyone says looks like a shark attack. I should maybe use that. Yeah, was attacked by a shark. Almost killed me.
Yeah, a karmic shark, I don't know, by a tree in Quebec. I think that when I step back, as your friend and say, as much as that really, really sucks, like the fact that you came out with a scar, but it took that to really get you to the place to see what the beauty of what you had and to realign it into something that is much more you,
Yeah,
right? And that's the thing. I think everyone who's listening, sometimes when not sometimes when things feel hard, when they feel overwhelming, when they feel out of alignment, and as a spiritual being that you're out of alignment, that frying pan moment will come if you don't address the tap on your shoulder. And mine was homelessness in 2000 and 2016. It was getting the amoeba and almost dying. And I know when I'm so trying to force things, Mark, and it's like push, 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 something always happens.
right.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And you want to pay attention and develop your intuition and trust it. And at the same time, if you're due for a smackdown, you can't avoid it. You can only prepare for it. I kid you not that the doctor who did the surgery on me, sounds so cliche. He's like, Mark, this would have killed a lesser man. It's like that. We used to say stuff like that in the SEAL teams. You know what I mean? We had to be harder to kill. We trained to be hard to kill. So my lifetime of training also prepared me for that.
Yeah.
You know, um,
I, I love that you said that because when I got the amoeba, Mark, they said you would have died if it wasn't for your nutrition
right.
because this kills people. It didn't kill you. I felt like I was dying. I was misdiagnosed, but it was because of my nutrition that I lived.
That's amazing. Yeah. So
So,
you were prepared for that. And that helped you get through. And it was a transform. That was you getting out of that eggshell. Unfortunately, then we build another eggshell around us, right? And so we have to break through that.
oh, yay. Yay.
So,
That's what I have to say. Well, Mark, thanks for coming back. I'm so genuinely happy for you. And for everyone listening, drop your comments. I read them all. And Mark's adventures are unfolding. So make sure that you do follow him, go to his website. We'll put everything in the show notes. But Mark, any final words to going back to that? I'm going to ask you to give advice to the Mark you were, let's say 5 years ago.
I tell Sandy if I could do, I know it's not possible, but if I could like take a Wayback Machine 5 years, holy shit, I'd make a lot of different decisions. So I think that's one of the new practices. Actually, I want to go back and say I do have a question I ask, and I ask my future self, like to guide me. Because if I had asked my future self 5 years ago what to do in certain situations, I would have gotten really different answers than what I did. So I think that's a good lesson is like, take a look every 5 years, look back and say, what would I have done differently? And you can see like a whole shit ton of things you could have done differently. So if you're ever sitting with something and you're confused or you're feeling that compulsion to act, that's like for me, it was that codependent. I got to act like when I bought the company Brute Force, like I can see now that kind of energy, that codependent energy, this will solve my problems. Just pause, breathe into it, and go forward 5 years and say, how's this going to play out? What if it doesn't work out? What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, for me, it was a $5 million mistake. That saying, I didn't coin this, but if it's not a hell, no. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Mhm.
So define what your hell yeses are and then stick to them.
Mm.
And life will get a lot simpler. So that's what I'm also working on that. Like, what are my hell yeses? And, I'm really clear what kind of people I want in my life. I'm not going to satisfy for anything less.
Mm.
Right? Because it's just slowing you down.
Yep. Amen to that, brother.
Hoo-yah, as we would say in the teams.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thanks again for being here. And for everyone listening, love you all to pieces. And again, give us your comments. We would love to have them. And with that, God bless. And I will see you all in the next episode.